On this episode of Secrets of Beautiful Gardens, we're working smarter, not harder.
Looks good, no mowing and no weeds.
As we go inside beautiful gardens that showcase the best in intelligent design.
Designing it so it works with the surrounding environment.
And intelligent design by nature itself. Mount Gambier's amazing sinkhole garden.
These imaginative gardens have really thought of everything. And I reckon this garden has ticked all the boxes. And a jam-packed full of tips for your garden at home. Because don't we all want to look just a little bit more intelligent? Yep, I'm a thinking man.
Hello and welcome to Secrets of Beautiful Gardens. Now, when people hear the term design a garden, they instantly think of clipped topiaries and manicured perfection. But it really doesn't matter how big is your budget or your block of land. Intelligent design is the difference between a good garden and a really great one.
So whether it's a tropical rainforest, a rooftop garden or an urban veggie patch that you desire, the intelligent garden design comes into play when you get the space right, you use your materials, and of course you pick the right plants.
On this episode, Jason and I will show you some of the most thoughtfully designed gardens in Australia. They're a clever combination of beauty and brains, and they're just jam-packed full of great tips and tricks that you can borrow to create a really beautiful garden, no matter what the setting.
I really am quite lucky. I get to travel the country and see the most beautiful gardens. Today, we're in Perth. It's shining under a beautiful sun and the Swan River's never looked any better. But we're off to Subiaco, the home of the West Coast Eagles and some pretty nice gardens. Well, it's a cute little cottage and the frangipani's probably as old as the house, but it's the backyard that we've come to check out. And what a pleasant surprise this little backyard is. What I like about it most is it hasn't tried to be modern and a contrast to the front of the house. Still got all the elements of a modern garden, but it's got the simple things that we all grew up with. A veranda, a pergola, somewhere to have a meal with the family, a lawn, and a pool to have fun in. And I can even see out the back there, what would have been a waste area or at best a car space is now another room in the garden. And down the very back of the yard, this is completely different to the rest of the garden. It's informal, it's got steppers rather than hard surfaces, and I like the fact there's this pergola made out of gal pipe. It's not expensive, but once that wisteria grows over it, it will truly be like an outdoor room. When people start adding pools and big pergolas, one of the things that disappears in a small backyard is the lawn. I'm really glad they've got it here because it's one of those things that makes this garden look older. But the thing that's smart are the edges. You've got pebbles along the border where it meets the timber work of the deck. That means that the grass can't grow up underneath the deck and then through it, making it really ugly. Along that edge, you've got the Courtyard steel. You can hit that every day with a whippersnipper. That's not going to do any damage. And right here where I'm standing now, you've got a nice wide garden edge, which doubles as a little path. So you're not wearing a track out in the lawn. But most importantly, it looks good. I love this garden, and it's not necessarily because of all the expensive elements like the koi pond. It's the clever little things that make a difference. If you have a look at this paling fence, it kind of looks like you should have gone along with a circular saw, cut it off all nice and straight, have it neat and tidy. But by leaving it jagged, it hides a few sins from the neighbours, like you can see their screen there and that ugly brickwork. If you wanted to hide it completely, it'd have to be another 600 mil high and it'd look too much like a compound. Leaving it like this, it looks like the skyline of the city in a silhouette at night. It's clever, it doesn't cost anything, and when you do that a few times through a garden, it makes the difference between, yeah, it's pretty nice and amazing. Landscape designer Tim Davies is the man behind this inspirational garden. So, Tim, congratulations on your garden, mate. What was your inspiration?
The clients wanted a pool and they wanted a contemporary sort of bent on the late 1800s cottage. And we just had this incredible blank canvas to create something really special.
So, was there any big challenges that you came across when you were building the garden?
Yeah, I think the greatest challenge was actually getting the core 10 pond in, because it came in on a semi down the laneway, and then we had to crane it in over the top of the carob tree and then position it around the jacaranda tree. So actually getting that over and nestling it in was the greatest challenge.
So with your soils over here, like, you pick it up and it's like you're at the beach.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the trick for a homeowner, someone who wants to do a bit of gardening at home in WA?
Our trick is blending manures and soil conditioners through the top sort of 300 mil of the soil, putting in a wetter soil as well, but organics are the key.
And I notice even the stools we're sitting on
are
the same dimensions as a pergola. By chance?
Know. They are, the offcuts.
Love an offcut.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like a bit of a sculpture sitting on here.
You look like a sculpture. That's weird.
Yep, I'm a thinking man. And what I was thinking was really clever about that place is how the pool has been integrated into the overall garden design seamlessly. Now, before you get carried away and want to do this at your place, you've got to remember this is a WA pool in a WA garden, and they've got WA pool fence regulations. So you need to check with your authority. Still, you can borrow plenty of the other ideas, such as the scale of the pool in comparison to the lawn and the entertaining area. No one element is too big or overwhelming, and nothing competes for your attention. It all works together as a whole, and it makes the design feel unified. And bringing the lawn right to the edge of the pool has turned it into more of a water feature. Plus, it adds a touch of class. Not the kind of class where you get homework, or in my case, detention.
Later in the show, a stunning rooftop garden that will blow you away.
As beautiful as that is, this rooftop garden I'm standing in, it's just as eye-catching.
Plus, we'll show you how to make the most of a small space.
From a bit of a goat track to a beautiful space in a courtyard now.
Coming up next, a clever garden that is as practical as it is plentiful. What was the inspiration for creating this beautiful garden?
Really to feed the family.
Welcome back. You know, to create a truly smart garden, you first need to decide what you're going to use it for. Entertaining, relaxing, or maybe you want to grow some fresh produce. Or perhaps you would like a truly multi-purpose garden that gives you the best of everything, like this garden in the west of Brisbane. The work and home of landscape designer Sidoni Carpenter. It's a cottage garden, edible garden and mini orchard, all set within the one very functional and beautiful suburban backyard. And the reason for its success is all down to intelligent design. This really is a clever, practical and beautiful garden. Good morning, Sidoni. How are you?
Hi, Graham. Well, thanks.
What an amazing veggie garden, and you've got the orchard all around you.
That's right.
What was the inspiration for creating this beautiful garden?
Really to feed the family.
Oh, right, very practical.
That's right.
You work on other people's gardens and designing gardens for them. What's it like creating your own garden?
Very, very challenging. It was probably the hardest brief that I've ever had before.
So you're tough on yourself?
Well, it's difficult to know where to start because there are so many amazing options, and I think when you know what you can choose, it makes it much harder.
You've got horseradish. Horseradish is an interesting crop because to go to buy it, it's very expensive, but here it's growing wild.
It grows like a weed and you don't have to do very much to get a great crop, so I think that there are a lot of these things that we can grow in our own garden.
You've got a great crop of kale.
Kale, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, they all do really, really well here.
And home veggie patches are definitely becoming more popular.
In the last couple of years, I've had more people asking me to put a veggie garden in. People are getting more engaged and wanting to be a part of their gardens.
The old veggie patches tend to be very formal, like the parterre, but the new ones a bit more haphazard. Some say a little bit untidy. Well, don't worry, just screen it off with this beautiful wall that Sidoni's created with this fabulous hybrid lily-pilly called Cascade. It's got lovely pink new growth in spring. It gradually ages to cream and then varying shades of green. but fantastic flowers. Look at them, great big heads of bright pink flowers. The honeybirds just love them, and the bees. Later on in autumn, those flower heads will turn to fabulous fruit, and then you get another lot of birds coming in. Lovely cascading shape and a great evergreen screen. I'll tell you something else I love are these stepping stones. These are made out of timber logs, and there's lots of gravel. No grass, no mowing, and no weeds. Some of Sidoni's tenants are these Indian runner ducks. They help to keep the snails under control throughout the garden. All parts of this garden actually blend into each other, adding to that informal feel. And this is the cottage garden. It's jam-packed full of beautiful, gorgeous flowers. Of course, the salvia's looking fantastic, lots of different varieties. And there's even some fabulous yellow hypericum. You know, it's not only bringing in lots of beneficial insects, but also pollinators, especially for the vegetables. And this is Sidoni's gully garden. Sidoni's philosophy here has been, firstly, plant the things you know are going to grow and really survive, like these beautiful coleus, lovely lime green, and blocks of purple. I love the grey native plectranthus, isn't it a beautiful thing? She's also added some risky plants, but they're starting to work, like the ornamental version of the sweet potato. Purple and in flower, bronzy green with a bit of pink in it, and a lovely lime green. These are fabulous carpets that keep the weeds down. Now here is a great idea that you might like to borrow. If you've got a steep embankment, put in some steps. But Sidoni's suggestion is timber steps. The infill is gravel with these little concrete steppers. But it could be very glary and hot. So she's softened it all off with an interesting group of plants. A little perennial ground cover Veronica, fabulous little thing. It'll flower later, nice little blue Hebe type flower. A juga, another blue one, and then up the top there, some Dichondra silver falls. They're all working to soften this off and reduce the heat reflection. This really is a clever, practical garden. You know, the thing I found most fascinating about Sidoni's garden is that back in 2011, when the Brisbane River catchment flooded, her entire garden was inundated with floodwaters. Sidoni rebuilt the garden after the floods and has been ingenious in the way she has dealt with building a garden on a floodplain. She's kept the floor of the river as a landscape feature in the garden, so if or when it floods again, the pebbles will help to slow the flow of water. So rather than fight what would almost certainly be a losing battle with Mother Nature, Sidoni has proven with intelligent design you can solve problems, embrace them, and turn them to your advantage. Coming up next, the small but perfectly formed gardens that bring big ideas to tight spaces.
And in a small space, it's every inch that counts, but it's how you use it that's more important.
And later in the show, an eco-friendly masterpiece that makes the most of its surroundings.
We're designing these gardens that are more like habitats.
G'day and welcome back. Now in Australia, more than 70% of us live in our capital cities. We're one of the most urbanised countries in the world. And inner city living is becoming even more popular. So the old quarter-acre block where you played your footy and cricket is becoming a thing of the past. Instead, we're turning to balconies, courtyards and rooftops, trying to maximise the little outdoor space that we've got. But when you haven't got much room to work with, your options can be limited. So here's two beautiful gardens in Sydney's inner city that are small in size but big in clever design ideas. When it comes to gardening, big is usually better. The more space, the better it looks. So what do you do when you've got a tiny little courtyard or a tiny little garden? You've got all the problems of fences, hard surfaces, shadows from the neighbours. Well, you don't curse those problems, you work with them. And I've got a courtyard and a tiny little garden that I'm going to show you where they've solved the problems and how. Wow, such a clever use of space. Yes, it's a courtyard, but it's still a garden. And there's something here for every different person in the family. Not to mention it's beautiful. Now, like any small space, if you imagine the bare bones, what would you be looking at? A paling fence, the wall of the garage, and then the straightness of the house. It'd very much be a rectangle and look very boxy. So to soften it and change that, they've just put gentle curves in, like in this stone wall and the seat across the back. The fire pit adds another circle, but the thing that does the best and makes this look more like a garden than a courtyard is the planting and how soft it is. Just softening things like the stairs and the curves around the lawn. This is very much a garden rather than a courtyard. And in a small space, you would think, keep it on the one level and make it as usable and as big as possible. But by having that level change, you create two spaces and a little bit of intimacy up the back. And that's what you want when you're sitting around a fire pit. And making your little retaining wall double as a seat is perfection, because in a small space, you want to use as many things as you can. So we've established that it's beautiful, but what is really good is it is usable. I can imagine a whole tribe of kids or mum and dad sitting out there around a fire. I can imagine the kids rumbling on the lawn. And the lawn is probably the reason why this little courtyard looks like a garden. It makes a little space very green. Most people think in a courtyard with big walls and high fences that the lawn's going to die. But really the only spot where it's not thriving is in there under deep shade. There's so much interest on the ground that your eyes are drawn down. You don't notice any neighbours. That little garden bed there looks like coral. And then the feature when you come into the yard is this pond. You've got the koi and the goldfish thriving. Now, it's not just a boring path that you walk over. There's steppers that you need to concentrate on. So they look good and they draw your eye. So in other words, it's clever garden design. And the brief for this courtyard was solitude, somewhere that was tranquil, where you could relax, but also entertain. And I reckon this garden has ticked all the boxes. I mean, who wouldn't want to lie down there and read the Sunday paper? Who wouldn't want to invite their friends over and really settle in for a good night's session? And as far as gardening goes, well, everything you look at pretty much looks after itself. Often when you look at beautiful gardens like this, you might think, I can't afford the whole thing. But if you break it down to individual elements, like just this daybed, it's doable and it's achievable. This is beautiful, it's sandstone, and it draws your eye to it. But it's also super comfortable to lie on. What I like about it most is it breaks this up into two areas. You've got the steppers surrounded by the ground covers, and this area is very green on the floor. And then you've got this large, formal, entertaining area. It's practical and it looks good. And in a small space, it's every inch that counts, but it's how you use it that's more important. Here you've got a mini retaining wall and this floating seat that wraps around the table and then runs longer than it. Clever for a lot of reasons. This garden bed could quite easily be at the same height as the paving and the garden bed on the other side, and you'd have to bring in more chairs. So the way it is now, I figure you can fit about 10, 15 people around this side, still got enough space for another 10 or 15 to stand up. If the table was in the middle, you'd have 6, and that'd be it. An ugly store-bought shed, $300-400, very practical. But when it's screened off with a beautiful hardwood slatted fence like this, the whole garden still looks beautiful and is practical at the same time. And just like the steppers over that little water feature, these ones do the same thing. They're irregular and they draw your eye down, creating a point of interest and creating interest with me. A little bit later on, I'm going to tackle my own courtyard, and I think this might feature heavily. Coming up next, the awe-inspiring sunken garden that will transport you to a different world.
The garden that'll absolutely take your breath away.
Plus, I solve a riddle of what to do with a boring courtyard. What a transformation.
Welcome back. The gardens we've seen on today's episode have all been smaller private gardens. Well, the next garden is a public space that is not only an incredible tourist attraction, it's also an example of how intelligent design has been used to create a beautiful garden in the most unlikely of locations. For most visitors to the limestone coast of South Australia, Mount Gambier's Blue Lake is an absolute must-see. The dormant volcano and the turquoise blue water has puzzled scientists and tourists alike for decades. This stunning lake is not the only geographic feature in the area. We're about to visit a garden that'll absolutely take your breath away. Well, take a look at this. I've never heard of this place before. It's called the Unveiled Sinkhole, named after the family who owned the property in the late 1800s. And what's a sinkhole? Well, it's a collapsed cave. And in the case of this one, a truly amazing garden. As you descend into the sinkhole, you can't help but be amazed by this incredible curtain of ivy. Now, it's closing in around about 80–90% of the sinkhole walls. Now, it's not actually growing on the walls, it's suspended. Look at this, it actually moves. There's a complete curtain. Now, they're using two different types of ivy. This one is the English ivy, and then there's the Canary Islands ivy. They're both very vigorous. But here in Australia, we like to get rid of it because it actually can really be invasive and take over gardens and entire suburbs. But here, it's actually protecting the walls of the limestone cave. With these limestone walls surrounding the garden, the soil is very alkaline, making it a challenging environment to grow plants. But clearly, they are doing something right. It's absolutely cavernous down here, isn't it? Originally, there was so much water in this sinkhole, Humferson used to row around with boats, believe it or not. But like all the sinkholes and these huge limestone caves in South Australia, the water is gradually draining away. And the plants are really quite fascinating. This is the tropical hibiscus from Hawaii and around Australia, but it's a native of China. But up there is the cool climate hibiscus from Syria, Hibiscus syriacus. It's in full bloom as well. Even the acanthus, this beautiful leaf goes right back to Rome and Pompeii. But it's very happy too here with this beautiful flower spike. Now, this plant here is actually a native conjovoy, and its species is Alocasia brisbanensis. No awards for knowing where it came from. Just look how lush this whole row of them is into this amphitheatre overlooking the lawn. It's not just the plants that are thriving in the sinkhole, the bees are loving it. Check out that honeycomb. Another plant that's really going well are these Dicksonia tree ferns. There's quite a few here, and they're all loving the lush, moist conditions. But of course, the feature plant are really the hydrangeas. But you'll notice there are hundreds of them, thousands of flowers, and they're all pink. There's not a blue one to be seen. And the reason they're pink is because of the alkaline soils, high alkaline that's leaching out of the limestone up in the walls. Normal in a garden would be around about 6 or 7. The little test I've done on the soil, it's sitting around about 9 to 9.5, 10. That's extremely alkaline. That's why all the hydrangea flowers are pink. While I'm down here, I noticed another little plant that's loving the conditions is the ground cover baby's tears. Lush and green and loving it. At night here, this place is swarming with possums. So in the 1970s, when the local community started to replant, they had to take that into account. So all of these plants had to be possum-proof. You might like to jot a few of them down because if you've got possums, well, they're not touching any of these here at all. Now, there are some plants that go back to the late 1800s, the 19th century, when Umfeston created this incredible garden. And it's an old olive grove and 2 beautiful pines. But of course, the real majesty of the whole landscape are these magnificent palms behind me. They go up 40, 45 metres, towering into the sky. Look, if you're ever in Mount Gambier, you've got to come and have a look at the incredible Sinkhole Garden.
Mate, I wanted to do that story. It's been on my bucket list for years, but one thing, how do you say it?
No, I was going to say it. And they go right back to Humperston's time. Cheers, it's the amazing Humperston sinkhole. Look, I'll write it down for you. I'll take you there and I'll show you around the garden. But please don't ask me to say it again.
Well, he's trying to get his tongue around it. I'm still trying to get my head around it. Now, if they found that today, council would go, oh, it's unsafe. We need to fill it with concrete and then put some bitumen over the top and they turn it into a car park.
Well, thankfully, clever and creative minds prevailed and turned it into a really very beautiful garden. And while large amounts of lime in the soil could have posed a problem, the designers chose plants that thrive in an acidic environment. It really goes to show that being clever doesn't mean being complicated. Everything here has been kept simple but stunning. And just like you saw in Sidoni Carpenter's garden earlier, the creative solutions to problems are what have actually made the garden the unique attraction that it is.
Speaking of smart and simple, I'm going to apply those principles to a little inner city garden that needs a bit of smartening up. You were smart, I was simple.
Yeah.
And I'm taking my inspiration from the two small space courtyards we saw earlier in the show. One of the things I loved most about both the spaces was their use of steppers. Not boring and straight and just in the one line, but a little bit all over the place. Still practical, but very pretty. Well, I found myself a little inner city courtyard and I'm going to link one end of it with the other. Now, I love my lawn, but there's a time and a place for it. Big, tall wall, high house, next to no sun. All this here is weeds. And the fact that you can dig in here and it comes out so easy just suggests that there's no roots. So this is the perfect candidate for some sleek-looking steppers. Now, to keep the price down, because large slabs of stone or even forming up and pouring concrete's expensive, I'm going with a large format paver. These guys are 600 by 400, and that's about as big as you can physically move around. But to vary up the sizes, I'm going to trim them to different widths. Thank you. And the secret to getting steppers of different sizes to look good is to get the gaps between them the same. So it works out that all my gaps are 145 mil. It's a lot easier to do it on the floor like this, just moving them slightly. Getting it right takes a couple of minutes, compared to sitting at a desk with a calculator, scratching your head, trying to remember year 9 at school. Wet the back of your pavers before you put them on the mud. That way, the pavers don't draw the moisture from the mud too quickly and cause separation. Step 1, you can have lots of fun. Step 2, there's so much you can do. Always wanted to be in a boy band. No? No? Not talking to me? When it comes to planting in a little courtyard or a small space like this, it's important to think about scale and size. These cordyline are perfect. They look quite big in this area. They'll hide a few of the walls and make this place look more intimate. Any bigger, well, they just end up looking like these palms, and they're pretty much telegraph poles because my eyesight, I can't even see the foliage. And on the ground, scale's important too. Things like these Dianellas, they're not going to take over the yard. They're going to fill this space, which means you don't need to weed. And if you have a look, there's lots of shade-loving plants here, lots of variegated plants, so the white margins or the colour on the leaf really brighten up the place when plants attack. And not only have we borrowed the stepper idea from the earlier garden, we've used the planting idea too. Why have soil when you can have plants? Between the steppers, to soften everything and to give this garden a garden, I'm planting dichondra. Now, this loves the shade. So Even in a dark spot in the garden, it's going to stay nice and thick like that. And it's not just the steppers that are going to give the floor texture. Obviously, the plants look great, but we're using a few different mulches. Pine bark around the plants and pebbles under the clothesline. From a bit of a gate track to a beautiful space in a courtyard now. What a transformation. Lucky for me, being smart in the garden's got nothing to do with school marks. That's a pretty smart little makeover, even if I do say so myself. Like the two courtyards we saw earlier, the floor layouts have been broken up instead of being solid lines or shapes. If you do this, it draws your eyes downwards, meaning you're focusing on the flooring and the plants at ground level. Not the fence, not your neighbours, the telegraph pole, or anything else that's an eyesore. Instead, you're just immersed in a beautiful garden that you've created. See, like I said, smart. A little later in the show, with the demand for space in our cities at a premium, rooftops and balconies are being called into service as backyards. And next,
Welcome to our garden, Graham.
a stunning natural garden that's the result of passion, sustainability, and clever garden design.
Wow, this is amazing, Philip. Welcome back to the show. I'm really excited to be sharing the secrets of this next beautiful garden with you, simply because I find it truly extraordinary. I'm here in the Dandenong Ranges just outside Melbourne to visit a unique garden created by an equally unique gardener, landscape designer Philip Johnson. He's invited me to have a look at his labour of love, his home garden called Alinda.
Welcome to our garden, Graham.
Thanks, mate. Wow, this is amazing, Philip. It's really hard to tell where the bush ends and the garden begins, but that's Philip Johnson's whole point, to make it as natural as possible, surrounding what's become his trademark design, the billabong.
Really that emphasis on sustainable design.
Right.
So looking at every single material that we select for a garden. So we're designing these gardens that are more like habitats.
Philip made history in 2013 when he became the first Australian to take out a gold medal and Best in Show at the world's most prestigious gardening awards, the Chelsea Flower Show. In fact, it was the first time in the show's 100-year history that all judges voted unanimously for the winner. The winning design was basically a small-scale version of Philip's very own backyard, and what a backyard it is.
The top billabong, it's actually a natural, chemical-free swimming pool. I've got the lower billabong at the bottom of the property, and that's where all my driveway runoff goes to. I've got an incredible hot spring too. This looks like it's just formed out of the rock. Within our billabongs, I've always got a big philosophy about using local plants, so indigenous water plants.
Right. Your timber walkways are beautifully positioned, so as you walk along, you're getting glimpses of the forest all the way through. Obviously, intentionally designed.
We've wanted to design to slow people down through the landscape. I love curved boardwalks.
Now, obviously, rock or stone is very important to your garden design.
Yeah, I absolutely love working with rock. It's a permanent resource, so it won't break down, so it's a really good solution for retaining.
And as far as fire goes, Philip's corrugated iron house and the extensive sprinkler system that uses the billabong water helps keep the property safe. Now, the plants that have been used here are pretty much endemic or native to the Dandenong Ranges here in Victoria, but there is one that I noticed that's come a long way to get here, the Wallamai pine over there. And what a beautiful specimen. Only discovered in 1994, but here it's powering in Philip's garden. The garden is actually filled with lots of these tree ferns, including Cyathea, which is the much slimmer one and has quite a black stem. This is Dixonia, a wonderful ancient tree, and the most common that you see in gardens. There are actually fossils of this in Antarctica. How's that? These are really ancient plants. But there's a couple of tricks. When you go to buy them, you often find you just get the trunk. It has no roots and no fronds. And you think, geez, I'm paying a few bob for that. Don't worry. Keep the base of the trunk just moist, but you must water the top right up here in the crown every couple of days with some seaweed in some water. And that's sort of like the heart, the brain of the plant. In no time, those wonderful fronds will unfurl and your plant comes to life. Tree ferns grow in a wide range of climates in Australia and are surprisingly tough. And they're a terrific way to get height and form into a native garden and are brilliantly used here in Alinda. There's a masterful touch in the plant selection that Philip has made. He's had to look at plants that are going to survive heavy rainfall here in the mountains and also extreme dry and drought conditions. So he's gone for cycads. Lots of them, and they look just so wonderful. But in other parts of the garden, there are beautiful native grasses, the Albany woolly bush from Western Australia, and a lovely little dwarf banksia from the east coast. All of those don't mind if it gets hot and dry. But even with the plant selection, it'll amaze you that Philip's garden has never been watered. Now that's sustainable. And just a little reminder that you're actually in a landscape garden, not the Aussie bush. And Philip's put in a hot outdoor shower. You know, there are many great achievements with this garden, but for my eye, the one that really stands out is the integration of the landscape with the natural bushland. It's impossible to tell where one starts and the other one finishes, and that is very clever. Philip's win at the Chelsea Flower Show was a brilliant moment for Australian gardening, and it was so incredibly well deserved. More than just a garden, Philip has created a habitat. And habitat gardening has become a genre in itself, with Philip being a master of this genre. Now, before you think, oh, I can never have something like this at home, think again. Habitat gardening is the simple principle of capturing and collecting water and reusing it. Then, by adding endemic plants, you're creating a habitat. It's a great principle that you can use in any location, on any scale. It is pure genius.
Coming up, the glamorous rooftop that is clever and considered, as well as stunning. And it brings something that you'd expect in a backyard, a lawn, into a rooftop. Best thing about this one, you don't have to mow it. G'day and welcome back. Now, earlier in the show, we checked out some beautiful inner-city courtyards that punched well above their weight when it comes to clever garden design. This next garden's proof that small spaces can still have big ideas and be really beautiful too. Well, I'm not in Melbourne for this garden, and there's no prizes for guessing what city I'm in. But as beautiful as that is, this rooftop garden I'm standing in is just as eye-catching. You might look at this rooftop and think, yeah, well, it's maintained within an inch of its life, so it's got all the expensive plants in it. I can't afford it or maintain them. But there's lots of things here that are just stock standard varieties. Viburnum is the hedge, which lots of people have in their backyards to screen off fences and neighbours, works perfectly well here doing exactly the same thing. The most asked question I get for people who have balconies, patios or rooftops is, nothing will grow, what can I grow because it always dies? Number one, simplest answer is something that's succulent. So all these ground covers that can handle a little bit of the heat and a little bit of drought and a little bit of the wind, which is all the things you get here because you don't have fences and houses and big trees to give you the shade, they thrive. And the big ticket item in this rooftop is the Dracaena Draco. Now, they had to get this size because it was the biggest one they could get to fit through the front door. It'll end up growing into a big, beautiful tree, but even at this size, price-wise, I'd expect to pay somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 wholesale. But it's a great feature. The little plant there with the spiky leaf, it's a lovely contrast to the succulent block. It's called Dioides, it's South African. It's one of the toughest plants you'll ever find. That's why you always see it planted in roundabouts. The agave, and even the buxus and the loropetalum. Now they're stock standard plants that you'll see in a cottage garden, but once they're established, they are some of the toughest and hardiest plants you'll ever get. And as for the garden beds, well, they're only shallow. Because it's on a roof, you need to keep things as light as possible. The garden bed's only about yay deep, and that's why this zoysia, which covers the ground like a lawn, is the perfect fix. It's relatively drought tolerant, and it brings something that you'd expect in a backyard, a lawn, into a rooftop. Best thing about this one, you don't have to mow it. With all the wind, all the sun, and shallow garden beds, they need to be well irrigated. But you can't see anything because there's no pop-up sprayers or sprinkler heads above the ground, which you get blown around everywhere and mess up all the glass. There's a drip system that runs through here, watering the roots and limiting the amount of evaporation. And all the garden beds go to drains, and you don't have to worry about going through the next door neighbour's ceiling. So this might be a small space, but it's also a beautiful, low-maintenance garden. And if the plants work here, they'll work anywhere.
Well, that garden gets an A+ in my book because the designer has brilliantly tackled every problem that comes with creating a rooftop garden.
Oh, it was perfect. I really liked the glass balustrade, so you've got the uninterrupted view, and then the low planting doesn't take away from that view, it just adds to it. It's a small garden, and it'd take you about 30 seconds to walk around, but with a comfy seat and those views, you could happily sit there in that garden all day and you'd always find something new.
It all goes back to the working smarter, not harder philosophy. You know, most people don't have the time or the know-how to really look after and maintain a complex garden like that. If you keep it simple and low maintenance, you'll be spending a lot less time working in it and more time enjoying it.
So when it comes to your garden, I'd take inspiration from your neighbours in your local area. If the plants work there, they're going to work at your place. You've got that right, then you pick the materials. Get that right, and you've got a garden that'll work for you rather than the other way around.
Well, that's all from us today. We hope you've discovered some super smart ideas so that you can create your very own beautiful garden. Bye for now.
See ya.
Next time, a living, breathing art gallery in the Australian bush. I find this place incredibly spiritual as we get up close and personal with some of the most creative and artistic gardens in the country.
You just want to hug it. Oh, so cool.
Using colour, texture, shape and form, art brings personality to any garden.
Now, I hate to think, but I think this button here is the exit. See ya.